Let's talk about the furry comic Sonic the Hedgehog, or in this particular case, Sonic IDW. It's called that because it needs to separate itself from the Archie Comics, but that's a whole 2-hour video about lawsuits and jerkwad artists and such. That's not the point of this exchange. To make a long, evil, petty, complicated legal battle story short, the Sonic comics rebooted in April of 2018, and there's never been a better time to jump on at the dawn of a new series. All you need to know is that they canonically take place inside the Sonic video game continuity, and they take place directly after Sonic Forces. Which, if you haven't played it, don't bother. Basically, a big war broke out. Eggman got a big lead on it when Sonic was captured for a length of time. There was a jailbreak, and Sonic and his friends beat them back. Not exactly breaking the mold there, but that does mean you don't have to read hundreds of Archie Sonic comics, play dozens of past Sonic games, and read up on canon and continuity for this one. Just know what happens in Sonic Forces and move into the comics from there. Short, concise, and a straight line through the comics with no complications. Now, I don't have to tell you who Sonic the Hedgehog is. He's a household name, along with all of his colorful bunch of buddies he runs around with. If you're already a fan, you know these characters, so let's jump straight into the story. Or at least that's what I would normally say, but unfortunately I have to take a little side trek here. You see, Sonic IDW is under a lot of mandates by Sega. Normally, I don't like to talk about anything other than the comic itself when I do these reviews, but I have to break that rule today. To make another long, complicated legal story short, Sonic IDW is bound by a series of rules that Sega has set down for the writers. No romance, no one from the games can die, good guys always win, and strangely enough that money does not exist in Sonic's world. And it's called Sonic's World, it's no longer called Mobius. There's a bunch of others pertaining to particular characters, both living and dead, but those are the main ones. Those seem to be some pretty heavy rules to run a good story by, especially in an action-heavy series like Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, I think I know why this is. Sega is a video game company at the end of the day, and Sonic the Hedgehog has almost always been E for everyone. So the evergreen crop of an audience that they're after is children. The only thing is, the vast majority of the people that enjoy the franchise are, well, in their 30s by this point. This creates a pretty wide chasm between what the fans want and what Sega is willing to allow. After how wild and crazy Archie Sonic got after hundreds of issues and decades of running, they really tightened up the rules on this one, much to the comic's detriment. So, all that being said, is there still a good comic in here that's worth reading? Or is it just a Saturday morning cartoon with no real stakes or anything important to say? Well, I decided to take the plunge and see how it went. I own the hardcover trades. There are 4 of them, as of the making of this video. That's about 50 issues of comics, give or take, which is a sizable enough amount to judge by in my book. We begin our story in the aftermath of the planet-spanning war that ended at the end of Sonic Forces, where Eggman is missing and the remainder of his Batnik armies are wandering around with no leader and no orders. Seek and destroy is all they seem to understand, and there are still a lot of them around. Even without the doctor around to tell them what to do, they are still smashing towns and settlements with startling efficiency. Amy Rose headed up the rebellion during Sonic's absence and continues to do so even after he's returned, having fallen into the role of Q to his James Bond. She coordinates where everyone is going, what needs doing, and who needs saving from a serious command center underground. It's nice to see some good character growth there. She's still all over Sonic as usual, but remember they're not allowed to get together, so don't get your hopes up that anything will actually happen there. After Dr. Eggman is located and has a brief stint with amnesia, he returns bigger and badder than before with his latest and greatest evil creation, the Metal Virus. The Metal Virus is a chrome-colored goo that, when it comes into contact with a living thing, turns them into a mindless robot zombie that he can command. A single touch can spread the virus from one living thing to another, and small things like grass and flowers are no exception. Now, this comic came out around the same time as a certain other virus. I'm sure you can guess which one. Stay at arm's length, boys and girls. You don't want to catch the Metal Virus, or any other virus for that matter. Hee hee hee. I was actually really surprised at how much this played out like a zombie apocalypse. People getting infected left and right, helpless civilians running in terror, a single scratch or touch or bite making you into one of them. Even Sonic is not immune and eventually catches the virus himself. The only thing that keeps him from turning immediately is his hyper-fast metabolism. He can basically run really fast to put the virus into remission for a short time, but he can't sleep or touch anyone because the virus is still there in his body. This turns the entire story into a race against time to find a cure or some other way to stop the Metal Virus before it takes Sonic over entirely, because once the blue blur turns, it's over for everyone else. Rolling around at the speed of sound, spreading the worst illness that the world has ever seen. The absolute chaos that goes on in this story arc is wild. Heroes sacrificing themselves, civilians turning into monsters in droves, Eggman slowly losing control of the endless hordes of Metal Virus zombies. It's great. Until I remembered that no heroes sacrificed themselves. No one's allowed to die, remember? Kinda puts a dull edge on the edgy virus apocalypse story when you know not a single character is permanently lost, even after they join the zombie robot horde. It doesn't detract from anything, but it certainly lowers the stakes. While all this is going on, a new villain is brought to the forefront, one Dr. Starline. He is a genius evil inventor and an absolute Dr. Eggman fanboy that worships the ground that Eggman walks on. And if I could just give a personal opinion here, Dr. Starline is by far the most interesting thing this comic has to offer. He was the one searching for Dr. Eggman after his disappearance. He was the one that helped him rebuild and resume his machinations, and he's the one serving as Dr. Eggman's right-hand man because he is absolutely starstruck with the man. He's read all the stories and seen all the destruction. He wants to be just like him and thinks he's a god among men. Until he spends more time with Eggman personally and begins to realize that his idol is not as perfect as he thinks. Starline meets and works for his hero, yes, but over time sees that not only is Eggman short-sighted with his plans, but often doesn't even have a fully formed plan before he takes action. His crosshairs are always on Sonic, and damn everything else and the collateral damage that may occur in the meantime. This is the primary reason that the metal virus goes out of control. Eggman didn't think of a way to stop it if it did get out of control. This, of course, leads to the robot zombie apocalypse that everyone is dealing with, while Starline begins to doubt and lose faith and eventually betray his hero. Starline's story arc serves as a great warning to never meet your heroes. By all means, idolize someone, look up to them and wonder what they would do when you're struggling, but don't think they're perfect or infallible. His disappointment in what kind of man Eggman actually is in the day-to-day gives rise to a newer, smarter, more badass villain for the entire series to enjoy, Starline himself. After all, if he modeled himself after his perfect image of Dr. Eggman, doesn't that mean that he's better than the reality already? Arguably, yes. And with so much military hardware from the aforementioned war still laying around in various bunkers and bases, there's plenty of room for some serious destruction in the meantime. Sonic IDW as a whole is a pretty good comic. Lots of bright colors, interesting characters, good art style, and a story that never really rests on its laurels. When one story arc ends, another begins with very little room for resting or recovering. Much like Sonic himself, it's go, 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 and not a lot of stopping in the meantime. Sonic is just as snarky as he's always been, Tails is just as smart as he's always been, Shadow is just as brooding as he's always been. Everyone pretty much adheres to their personality archetypes. However, at the end of the day, I always found myself wanting more. I can feel Sega's mandates and rules and fingerprints all over this one, especially with the Metal Virus storyline. You had a freaking apocalypse scenario and not a single character died or even suffered a serious injury? I call bullshit. Unfortunately, when I was done reading, all I could really do was step back and see all the weights and chains holding this series back because it will never be as great as it could have been. There are even hints throughout the story that there are romantic couples that could have happened if Sega would just allow such a development to occur, but implication that got snuck by the censors is really all we're given. Heck, it's even implied that Vector has a thing for Vanilla, Cream's mom, and you know that's never gonna happen. It's just so frustrating. It's right there. The makings of a fantastic comic, they're right there. But all these rules and regulations and mandates are just holding it back from being great. I'm sorry, if the Friendship is Magic comic can do war, death, politics, economics, and romance better than you can, maybe it's time to go back to the writing room. Or just drop it and go make something else. You think I'm kidding, you should see the fucking body count in these comics. Anyway, that being said, should you read Sonic IDW? I'd say yes, but just keep in mind that the stakes are very low in this comic. You shouldn't treat it any more seriously than, say, an episode of Scooby-Doo or some other Saturday morning cartoon. Sure, it may try to be serious or epic here and there, but it's just not. It refuses to get out of its own way, and it's held back by too many rules set down by Sega. It makes for some fun light reading, especially if you're already a Sonic fan. Definitely check it out, but keep your expectations low for this one. It's not a bad comic, it's not a bad story, but it could have been so much more than it was allowed to be. So, I guess check it out.